Left my husband after he didn't care about my big promotion. Hi everyone. I want to share something that's been heavy on my heart. Recently, I reached a huge milestone at work. I got a big promotion. It's the kind of step forward I've been dreaming about and working toward for years. All those late nights, the extra hours, pushing myself beyond my limits, it finally paid off, and I felt proud. It was more than just a title change. It was a symbol of all the hard work I'd put in. My husband and I had been together for several years, and during that time, he'd seen every part of my career journey. He knew how much this meant to me. Over the years, I'd leaned on him through all the challenges, hoping for his support as I reached for my goals. But on this special day, I started to realize something that would change everything. Achieving this promotion was a long, exhausting journey. I spent years working late into the night, giving up weekends, and pouring every ounce of energy into my job. There were times when I was overwhelmed by the challenges, but I kept going. I made a lot of sacrifices because this goal was so important to me. I wanted to prove to myself and to those around me that I could reach this milestone. Throughout these years, my husband would often tell me he believed in me and supported my career ambitions. He'd say things like, "You've got this," or, "I know you're going places." Hearing that reassured me, especially on the tough days. So, when the promotion was finally within reach, I assumed he'd be just as thrilled as I was. I thought he'd understand how much it meant, and I looked forward to sharing the excitement with him. But if I'm honest, there were signs along the way that something was off. There were times when I'd come home eager to share a work win or talk through a challenge, but he'd seem distant, barely engaging or quickly shifting the conversation. I brushed these moments aside, telling myself he was probably tired or had his own things on his mind. But as they kept happening, I started to feel a small doubt creeping in. His words sounded supportive, but his actions made me question if he truly cared about my career as much as he said he did. The day I got the promotion felt incredible. When my boss called me in to share the news, I could barely contain my excitement. My hard work had finally paid off, and I felt this huge rush of pride. My coworkers were all congratulating me, and I felt like I was walking on air. It was one of those moments I'd imagined for so long, and it felt even better than I thought it would. Right away, I couldn't wait to tell my husband. I pulled out my phone, sent him a message, and let him know the big news. I told him how thrilled I was and suggested that we celebrate, maybe go out for dinner or just spend the evening together. I pictured us sharing this special moment, something I'd been dreaming of for years. When his reply came, it wasn't at all what I expected. It was just a simple, "Congrats." No excitement, no interest, no follow-up. Just that one word. I felt this wave of disappointment wash over me. All that joy and pride I'd felt just moments before started to fade. I couldn't believe that this big moment in my life didn't seem to matter to him at all. That evening, I came home still feeling excited, hoping my husband would finally share in my happiness. But when I walked in, it was like any other day for him. He was completely absorbed in his own things, barely looking up to greet me. I tried to bring up the promotion again, telling him about my plans for the new role and what it would mean for my career. I was hoping he'd finally react with some interest, maybe ask questions or show he was proud. But his response was flat, almost as if he hadn't even heard me. He just gave a nod and went back to what he was doing. In that moment, I felt the excitement drain out of me. It hurt that something so meaningful to me seemed to mean so little to him. After that night, disappointment stayed with me, weighing heavily on my mind. I started to wonder if my husband truly valued my achievements, or if he even cared about them at all. I had worked so hard, yet when it came to celebrating, he couldn't be bothered. It made me question how he really saw me and my goals. Thinking back, I realized this wasn't the first time he'd brushed off something important to me. There were birthdays, work accomplishments, and even anniversaries where I hoped he'd make an effort, only to be met with the same indifference. I'd often ended up celebrating alone or convincing myself it didn't matter. But, deep down, it always hurt. Now, all those past disappointments felt like they were piling up. Each ignored milestone and missed celebration added to a growing resentment I could no longer ignore. I started to feel underappreciated and overlooked, as if my efforts and dreams meant nothing to him. This promotion, which should have been a joyful moment, brought all those buried feelings to the surface. And I couldn't pretend they weren't there anymore. I couldn't keep these feelings to myself anymore. So I decided to talk to my husband. I told him how much this promotion meant to me, how it was something I'd worked so hard for, and how I'd really hoped he would be proud of me. I wanted him to understand how hurt I felt by his lack of interest, and how much it mattered to have his support. But instead of listening, he brushed it off. He seemed annoyed, saying I was overreacting and that it was just a job. He made excuses, saying he was tired or busy, as if that explained everything. He didn't even try to understand where I was coming from. At that moment, it hit me. He genuinely didn't care about my career or my accomplishments. He didn't respect the things I valued or the goals I'd worked so hard to reach. That realization was painful, but it also opened my eyes. I saw, clearly, that I'd been holding on to hope that he would change, when in reality, he was never truly interested in supporting me. This conversation was a turning point. After that conversation, I started really thinking about what I needed in a relationship. I realized I needed support, someone who values my efforts and is there to cheer me on. I wanted a partner who respects my goals and celebrates with me when I reach them. Looking back, I saw how often I'd felt alone in my marriage, like I was fighting for my dreams without any real encouragement from him. The lack of support over the years had slowly left me feeling isolated, as if my achievements didn't matter. This relationship, which I once believed was a partnership, now felt empty and unfulfilling. I finally understood that this marriage was no longer giving me the emotional connection I needed. One night, as I sat with all my thoughts, I had a moment of clarity. I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waiting for something to change when it was clear he wasn't going to support me in the ways I needed. It was painful to admit, but I knew I had to leave the marriage. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I felt invisible and unappreciated. Preparing myself for that decision was hard. I had to accept that this chapter of my life was over, no matter how much I had hoped for things to get better. I took a deep breath, gathered my strength, and knew I had to do what was best for me. When I finally told him, it wasn't easy. I sat him down and told him I was leaving, explaining how I felt about the lack of support and the emotional distance between us. His reaction was calm, almost too calm. He didn't try to change my mind or show any real emotion. It felt like he had already accepted that I was no longer there, even before I said the words. The first few weeks after the breakup were tough. Adjusting to being on my own again wasn't easy, but there was also a sense of freedom. I didn't have to explain myself or wait for someone else's approval. For the first time in a long time, I could focus on what I needed and wanted without anyone holding me back. In my career, things started to fall into place. Without the emotional weight of the relationship, I was able to give everything to my work. I started to achieve even more than before, promotion after promotion, and new opportunities I hadn't even dreamed of. It felt so rewarding to see my hard work paying off in ways I never expected. Most importantly, the breakup helped me reconnect with myself. I realized I'd been ignoring my own needs and putting others before my own ambitions for far too long. Now, I was pursuing my goals unapologetically, finding a new sense of self-worth and confidence that I hadn't had in years. Looking back on my marriage, I realized there were some good moments too. We shared laughter and memories that I'll always cherish. But there were also things I ignored for too long. The lack of support, the emotional distance. As much as I tried to make it work, I had to face the truth. The relationship just wasn't fulfilling anymore. It couldn't last because I wasn't being valued in the way I deserved. To anyone watching this, I want to say, don't ever lose sight of your own worth. If you find yourself constantly giving, but never receiving the support and love you need, it's important to recognize those red flags. A healthy relationship should lift you up, not hold you back. You deserve someone who celebrates your accomplishments and is there for you through the highs and lows. I'm moving forward now with a renewed sense of purpose. I'm proud of what I've achieved on my own and excited for what's to come. I've learned that happiness doesn't depend on someone else, but on creating a life that brings you peace and fulfillment. I'm focused on continuing to grow, both in my career and as a person, and I'm looking forward to finding the right kind of love, one that's built on mutual respect and support.